This show is part of the Darkmoor Podcast Network.
To join our community Discord or see more content from our members, visit darkmoorpodcasts.com.
Hello everyone and welcome to Dragon Mind, the TTRPG podcast where we discover our best selves through gaming. Today, we're continuing our D&D 2024 Practical Possibilities coverage with the 2024 Monk. If you want to contact me directly, you can message me in the Darkmoor Podcast community Discord or email me at dragonmindpodcast@gmail.com, all linked in the description below. Monk is my favorite redesigned class of the 2024 Player's Handbook, and I'm so excited to cover it as the last entry in our D&D 2024 class reviews. With the game's 2014 version, Warlock and Monk were the two classes in the game that I had a hard time recommending to players. There were even times I actively dissuaded players from choosing them without implementing significant homebrew fixes. Now, while Warlock suffered from a boring gameplay loop that resulted in players just Eldritch blasting, Monks lacked survivability. They had a lower hit die than most other martials, an unreliable way to escape melee once in it, unlike the rogue, and their armor class was mediocre at best. Many times at tables I'd play at, a monk would start combat only to get knocked to zero in a round or two, finding themselves unable to participate. I've had various debates over the years around whether or not underpowered characters are even worth playing, and although I'm aware of optimization within the system, I'm not against players choosing a less optimal build route. However, I dissuade builds that I foresee boring the player piloting them. And nothing is more boring than watching everyone else play while you sit and make death saves more often than not. So what about 2024? Surprisingly, the 2024 Monk retains the 2014 version's hit die and armor class. At second level, they get similar escape tools as the rogue, bonus action dash and disengage, but the real game changer is another case of String of Pearls game design that I mentioned first in the fighter review. String of Pearls being a metaphor in Tai Chi where one looks at the pearls on the string surrounding the one that's out of place in order to bring it into alignment. Just as how Weapon Mastery adds a layer of depth to weapon using classes, the reworked rules for unarmed strikes completely change how monks work. Grapple and Shove, which used to specifically be part of the attack action in 2014, are now considered to be a kind of unarmed strike, meaning that every time the monk can unarmed strike again, they can choose to grapple or shove rather than just pile on damage. Now, even from level 1, if a monk finds themselves in trouble, they can use unarmed strike as a bonus action to attempt to shove an enemy 5 feet away from them, giving them space to escape a bad position without provoking an opportunity attack. With up to 5 unarmed strikes at 10th level and a slight damage boost to the martial arts die, monks went from, arguably, the weakest class in the game to one of the most interesting. So let's take a look at the changes between the 2014 and 2024 monks. So first, 2024 monks begin with proficiencies in all simple weapons and all martial weapons that have the light property. This relates to the reworked martial arts feature where these are the same weapons that are defined as monk weapons, meaning the melee attacks using them use dexterity rather than strength, and their damage die increases with the martial arts die. Now, this sounds like the monk is getting a lot more options, but really it just means that they can now use scimitars and great clubs with martial arts. Martial arts also gives monks the ability to use dexterity rather than strength for the save DCs of grapples and shoves, and make an unarmed strike as a bonus action even if they haven't taken the attack action on their turn. Looking at the monk as a single-classed unit, monks are more versatile than ever. Their martial arts die gets a slight damage bump, starting as a D6 and progressing all the way through to a D12. However, these benefits all come with the same restrictions as 2014. Monks can't wear armor, wield a shield, or wield a non-monk weapon. While this doesn't make multi-classing impossible, it does make things a little trickier when it comes to finding compatibility with other class features. Now, one of the 2014 Monk's greatest criticisms was that it had similar escape features at level 2 that Rogue had at the same level, except the Monk version required spending key points to get the same effect. Now at level 2, Monks get Monk Focus, which gives them their own point system again. The playtest title for these were Discipline Points, and I love how they finally just landed on Focus Points. And you do get the same 3 options: Flurry of Blows, Step of the Wind, and Patient Defense. Flurry of Blows is the same as in 2014, although remember that now the unarmed damage die is a little bigger. It's a D6 rather than a D4. Patient Defense now allows a character to disengage as a bonus action without a focus point cost, but still there's an option to spend a focus point to allow the character to also get the benefits of the dodge action as well. Step of the Wind is similar. As just a bonus action, a monk can dodge, and if they spend a focus point, their jump distance triples and they can disengage for free on top of the dash bonus action. Now on the face of it, it may appear that Monk now has the superior level 2 feature over Rogue. However, Rogues can still uniquely hide as a bonus action, which synergizes with their iconic playstyle better. And it leaves Monks as this more technical, crunchy class, a hint to its complexity level. Now, new to Monks at level 2 is Uncanny Metabolism, which allows you to regain all spent focus points when you roll initiative, which you can use once per long rest. This makes sure that you have access to points to spend in encounters where you'll need them the most. So if you happen to be a player or are DMing for players that are budget-minded and try to hoard their focus points, there's kind of a use them or lose them mentality with Uncanny Metabolism. So your players should feel free to experiment with their focus point features earlier on in smaller encounters, knowing that they can start with all of their focus points regained if there's like a big boss fight. At level 3, Deflect Missiles has been redesigned into Deflect Attacks, expanding the feature to reduce ranged or melee attacks that deal bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing damage. While Deflect Missiles was neat in 2014, it was a highly situational feature that ultimately didn't come up all that much, at least at tables I was a part of. Now, it serves as a reliable survivability feature, allowing monks to reduce damage when they're hit rather than just increase their hit points or armor class. Yes, this relies on their reaction, but it is a distinct feature that helps a monk stay in the fight. And this feature eventually upgrades to Deflect Energy at 13th level, allowing a monk to use this against attack rolls that deal any type of damage. At 5th, probably most controversially, Stunning Strike has been redesigned. Like Divine Smite with Paladin, now Stunning Strike can only be used once per turn. The condition lasts until the start of your next turn rather than the end of it. Most notably, on a successful save, the hit target's speed is halved and the next attack against them has advantage. So although it can only be used once per turn, it at least produces a reliable effect, meaning that monks won't be blowing all of their focus points trying to Stunning Strike over and over again. There's been a lot of debate over whether these changes are an overall nerf to the class. My take is that with the power increases we've seen in other respects, from martial arts to monk's focus to deflect attacks, even if this redesign is less powerful than its original version, which I'm not really convinced it is, I think that overall the monk kit has become more powerful. As I've said in previous episodes, I personally don't like it when a single class feature or spell is seen as so good that it's the one best option, like Warlock's Eldritch Blast or, in 2014, Paladin's Divine Smite. I've watched many players Stunning Strike over the years, and from my memory, which could be flawed, I found it tended to fail more than it succeeded, and often led to players being disappointed more than celebratory. I think limiting it to once per turn, with a guarantee that you will enjoy some kind of benefit, is ultimately the right move, in order just to keep the game moving and keep the players enjoying the decisions they're making. Interestingly, at 6th, monks get Empowered Strikes, formerly Key Empowered Strikes. Now, rather than ignoring resistance to non-magical damage as the feature did in 2014, Empowered Strikes now allows your unarmed strikes to hit with force damage instead of bludgeoning. During the 1D&D playtest, there was a lot of speculation over the new monster design and how damage resistances would play into the game's overall balance. I did a quick search on D&D Beyond with the D&D 2014 free rules, and from what I found, there were 43 monsters in the basic rules that had resistance to non-magical bludgeoning, slashing, or piercing damage. Initial speculation was that rather than have this specific resistance, monsters like this would have resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing from any source, magical or not, and circumnavigating it would require another damage type like force. That being said, according to YouTuber Pack Tactics, who got an advanced copy of the 2024 Monster Manual, of the 504 stat blocks, only 21 have resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing damage, meaning that marshals won't have to worry about either building in ways to get alternative damage types for their weapons, or to have their DM give them a magical longsword or something in order to simply keep up with spellcasters in the same way as they often had to do in 2014. Now, being able to switch from bludgeoning to force damage for unarmed strikes is still great for damage reliability, and in the context of the new monster design, it's thankfully less necessary to just enjoy the game as it was in 2014. Now, level 10 is where these 2024 monks really branch apart from the 2014 version. Level 10 offers improvements to Flurry of Blows, Patient Defense, and Step of the Wind. Flurry of Blows now offers 3 unarmed strikes instead of 2, Patient Defense grants temporary hit points when you spend the focus point on it, and Step of the Wind allows you to carry a willing creature with you as you move using the focus point effect. Also at level 10 is a redesigned version of both Stillness of Mind and Purity of Body called Self-Restoration. YouTuber Treant Monk explained in one of his videos on Monk why Stillness of Body was a feature that just didn't work, citing the heavy cost of needing to take an entire action, as well as the fact that many Charmed and Frightened effects prevent you from taking that action in the first place. Now, as a passive effect, at the end of each of your turns, you can choose to end Charmed, Frightened, or Poisoned on yourself, and foregoing food or drink doesn't increase your exhaustion level. At 15th, Perfect Focus is a redesign of Perfect Self, which used to be the 20th level monk feature. It's now gained 5 levels earlier, again regenerating your focus points on initiative rolls when you run low and you don't use Uncanny Metabolism. At 18th, monks get Superior Defense, allowing them to spend 3 focus points at the start of their turn to get resistance to all damage but force, similar to the old monk's Empty Body, but without the astral projection or invisibility effects. And finally, what Treant Monk calls the best 20th level feature in the game, Body and Mind grants a 4-point increase to the monk's dexterity and wisdom scores. So, is the monk the right class for you? Starting with complexity, monk is the highest complexity martial character in the game. What it may lack in raw damage output, it more than makes up for with a versatile action economy. Especially at level 10, it can consistently get 5 attacks per turn, any of which can be substituted for a grapple or shove effect, with 1 stunning strike per turn to at least slow a target down. In emergencies, it can use its bonus action to escape or reposition, and the combination of deflect attacks and evasion are great for survivability. It's also no slouch in the damage department. Damage is just the least interesting thing this class has to offer. If you're looking for a character that just mindlessly punches things hard, chances are you may be looking at an unarmed fighter or paladin build. After all, the redesigned unarmed fighting rules open up some possibilities for other classes to have great unarmed moments as well. However, if you're a precision-minded player that likes having fine control over your character's mechanical performance, Monk is probably right up your alley. In terms of role, I see the 2024 Monk as a great controller. Whereas wizards will affect the terrain or target multiple creatures with a single spell, monks will be great at inflicting the right debuff to the right target at the right time. Need the target to stay put? Lock them in a grapple. Need to knock them prone? Shove them to the ground. Need to trigger advantage for the rogue? A nice stunning strike guarantees that. Now, even with some of their survivability features upgraded, monks will still have some weaknesses to be mindful of, mainly their constitution saves. Because their armor class depends on dexterity and wisdom, monks won't likely have a high constitution score. In terms of being targeted by attacks, that weakness is mitigated by deflect attacks and potentially patient defense. Even dex saves are covered by evasion at 7th, and they'll have a better time with wisdom saves because wisdom is a secondary stat. However, con saves are common, and a caster that targets a monk with a powerful con save spell still has a decent chance to just knock him out in one hit. So you'll want allies that can help defend the monk from stuff like that. Maybe let them settle in an aura of protection from a paladin, just to make sure they don't relive some 2014 nightmare scenario. So, it's time to rank the monk subclasses in order of complexity. Of all the classes we've reviewed, I think the 4 monk subclasses are the closest in terms of both complexity and power, and I can see arguments to why one may reorder my list. However, having taught many new players over the years, I think that Warrior of the Elements is the simplest in my opinion. The iconic feature you get at 3rd level is Elemental Attunement. At the start of your turn, you can spend a focus point to imbue yourself with elemental energy for 10 minutes or until you're incapacitated. During this time, unarmed strikes reach 10 feet greater than normal, and you can replace the damage type with acid, cold, fire, lightning, or thunder. And you can force a target to make a strength save to move up to 10 feet closer or away from you. Now, it sounds like there's a lot going on here, but let's review our criteria for determining complexity. The 3 questions I ask are, 1, how many choices does a player have to make while building? 2, how many choices does a player have to make at the table? And 3, how much does a player have to remember? Building-wise, you're not picking cold or fire up front. So it's not a menu of options that you're locked into, like preparing spells or choosing a hunter's prey option from Hunter Ranger. In terms of memory, there are a few elements to remember, but with some practice, players will generally remember when they spend the focus point, they get an extended reach, and they get to pick a damage type. The thing that they're most likely to forget is to ask for the strength save, but even then, it's a situational part of the feature, and there's going to be very few times that's going to determine the outcome of a fight. The most complexity comes from choosing when to spend the focus point to activate Elemental Attunement, and choosing a good damage type. Luckily, Acid and Thunder are fairly reliable in terms of damaging creatures that have elemental resistances, so they make great defaults for players that will get stuck making that choice. Unlike many of the other subclasses, this feature also only requires 1 focus point in order to get the benefit for a 10-minute duration. Other subclasses will require more budgeting when it comes to their focus point spending. Although Elemental Attunement is a paragraph of text, Warrior of the Elements offers a relatively simple upgrade for an efficient cost. At higher levels, the features are also either straightforward or not worth using. Elemental Burst at 6th tends to not do great damage according to Treant Monk, and Stride of the Elements offers a fly speed and swim speed while Elemental Attunement is active. Very useful, not very complicated. I debated a bit on which subclass to put next in line, and I think I'm going to give it to the Warrior of Mercy. At 3rd level, Mercy gets 3 features, the simplest of which is proficiency in Insight, Medicine, and the Herbalism kit. Throughout its leveling progression, the subclass presents 2 options, Harm and Heal, which requires some situational awareness. At 3rd, Harm allows you to spend a focus point to deal extra necrotic damage to a creature you hit with your unarmed strike equal to a roll of your martial arts die plus your wisdom modifier, essentially acting as a small smite. Hand of Healing, on the other hand, either allows you to use an action and an expenditure of a focus point to heal a creature you touch with a roll of your martial arts die plus wisdom modifier, or to replace one of the unarmed strikes from Flurry of Blows without expending an extra focus point. Of course, the ideal situation is that you could include the Hand of Healing as part of a Flurry of Blows so that you don't have to spend your action or an extra focus point, but that requires specific positioning to pull off. Ultimately, I think Hand of Healing is a great backup healing option, but not one that I'd build a party around. At higher level, Hand of Harm upgrades to allow you to temporarily poison a target, and Hand of Healing upgrades to end blinded, deafened, paralyzed, poisoned, or stunned. Again, like Warrior of Elements, Mercy doesn't have a lot of build decisions or passive mechanics to remember. Although the kit comes with some interesting choices, most of the time I expect you'll probably use focus points to deal extra damage with Hand of Harm. Although, if you're in a fight with a lot of conditions being inflicted, Hand of Healing can be a nice way to keep your allies in the fight. Which brings us to the Warrior of the Open Hand. What makes Open Hand more complex than Elements or Mercy is its menu of situational options at 3rd level. At 3rd, when you hit a creature with Flurry of Blows, you can choose to addle, push, or topple the target. Push and topple are similar to, but slightly mechanically different than their identically named weapon masteries, whereas addle prevents the target from making opportunity attacks until the start of its next turn. In a way, these 3 effects are a little easier to understand than Elemental Attunement or Hand of Harm and Hand of Healing. However, you're potentially hitting 2 targets with Flurry of Blows, and by extension making 2 choices, each of which isn't as obvious as the other subclasses. Depending on the creature, push may be easier to pull off than topple, or maybe to save an ally, you'll want to addle. Choosing the best option in the context of a situation requires more mechanical knowledge than just making your unarmed strikes deal thunder damage, or spending a focus point to deal some extra necrotic damage. At higher levels, Open Hand grants a bonus action to heal yourself with a roll of your martial arts die, and allows you to Step of the Wind even if you take another bonus action. It's similar to, but just a little bit more complicated than Warrior of the Elements' Stride of the Elements. And finally, in my opinion, the most complex monk subclass in the player's handbook is Warrior of Shadow. Unlike the other subclasses, Shadow doesn't offer a direct combat boost, instead offering Dark Vision, Minor Illusion, and the ability to cast a version of the Darkness spell that you can see within for 1 focus point, which I personally consider a bargain. That being said, of all the subclasses, this one requires the most finesse and mechanical knowledge to use to its potential. Now, Dark Vision is just great to have on any character. Minor Illusion is a little DM dependent. Out of combat, you can do a lot of fun things with it and get a lot of cool role-playing moments. But if you have a creative DM, you could also use it to create interesting combat moments, like create an illusion of cover that you can hide behind. The Darkness option, of course, is the real draw, potentially granting you advantage on all of your attacks, while a blinded creature within the Darkness has disadvantage on all of theirs. However, Darkness covers a decent area, and you can accidentally blind your allies if you're careless. That being said, blind fighting is now a fighting style core to the game, meaning that it's easier than ever to build a party where a Shadow Monk can drop Darkness while their allies have blind fighting, keeping them active in melee even when Darkness takes away their normal vision. Then of course, you get Shadow Step at 6th, allowing you to bonus action teleport in Dim Light and Darkness, with advantage on the next melee attack you can make before the end of the current turn. I can see many party compositions and situations where a Shadow Monk ends up being the most powerful of the 4 subclasses, but going in, also understand that it requires the most situational awareness to use effectively. To reiterate, of all the classes we've covered, the Monk subclasses have the smallest differences in terms of complexity and power. I ranked them in terms of complexity to be consistent with the other class reviews, but at the end of the day, if a player is willing to take on the complexity of playing Monk with its base class features, that player is going to have fun no matter which of the subclasses they choose. Now on to multiclassing. Like Barbarian, Monks have fairly tight restrictions from a build perspective. In order to use their core features, they can't wear armor, wield shields, or wield weapons that aren't simple melee or martial melee with the light property. Their ability score distribution is going to rely heavily on dexterity and wisdom, which is going to limit which prerequisites we'll have easy access to. I think one of the most obvious synergies is combining Shadow Monk with levels of Rogue. Martial melee weapons with the light property, short swords and scimitars, also have the finesse property, making them natural fits for both martial arts and sneak attack. In addition, Rogue can give you weapon mastery, which gives you early access to the Nick property for an additional attack. Both Darkness and Shadow Step offer easy ways for you to get advantage, which is an easy trigger for sneak attack. Of course, I wouldn't dip into Rogue until at least having 5 levels of Monk, as extra attack is a significant DPR boost you wouldn't want to miss. The other thing to consider is that daggers are considered Monk weapons, and the way martial arts works, daggers are going to have the same damage die as scimitars or short swords, plus it has the throne property. So this is an odd case where dagger might actually be a better weapon than those other two. While Rogue and Monk do synergize nicely, they can also easily overlap. Both get evasion at level 7, so in order to avoid getting a redundant level, you may want to stop your Rogue progression at 5 or 6, or stop your Monk progression at 5 or 6 and just finish off your progression with Rogue. Of course, there is another significant DPR increase at Monk 10, where Flurry of Blows offers 3 attacks. So in this case, understanding the level range you're expected to play at is gonna really help you make an informed decision of the proportions of different character levels you build with. Like with Ranger, dipping into Druid or Cleric offers monks some cool emergency spells using an already prioritized modifier as the spellcasting stat. And since monks can't use armor or shields, the choice to pick Magician or Thaumaturge respectively is a little easier. Also, with the new martial arts rules, you can unarmed strike as a bonus action and then cast a spell. So potentially you could just shove an opponent into an area of effect for something like Entangle or Spike Growth. Just remember, any levels you dip out of Monk, again, delays that sweet level 10 DPR boost. But if you're playing in a limited level range, like Wild Beyond the Witchlight, which is 1 through 8, you might as well experiment with multi-classes like this because you won't get to level 10 anyways. And speaking of Ranger again offers that Nick weapon mastery right from level 1, some spells at level 1, and Hunter's Mark is a neat little damage boost that pairs nicely with Flurry of Blows because now each time you hit with that extra unarmed strike, you're also dealing that Hunter's Mark damage. Overall, the reworked unarmed strike system and Monk progression makes Monk the class that I'm most excited to play. It strikes a great balance of being interesting and versatile without being so powerful that it becomes an obvious option over other martial characters. And that brings us to the end of our class reviews. Now, there are 2 more episodes of Practical Possibilities for D&D 2024 I want to release. One on the new Monster Manual and one on SRD 5.2. But it'll probably take some time for those to drop because I have to wait for them to come out. Until then, remember, your story matters. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Dragonmind is a proud member of the Darkmoor Podcast Network. To discover more TTRPG content like this, visit darkmoorpodcasts.com. If you had any insights or questions, be sure to email us at dragonmindpodcast@gmail.com or post in our discussion channel in the Darkmoor Podcast community Discord, linked in the description below. Our theme song, J-Pop, is brought to you by Theslian Studios. You can check out more of their awesome work at theslianstudios.com. Have an awesome day, and remember, your story matters. Bye-bye now.
Well, Grimton, Morlinde and Ulrich are gone. We're in a new, unfamiliar land of Kolgafir. What's our first move?
Polaris, I'm not too certain, but I did hear Fishbelly talking about something.
Oh, yeah. With the Warlord's half-sister in a meeting.
Yeah, that's about the only lead we have so far. We haven't been here long. Might be worth checking out.
Seems like a plan to me.
Join us as our party explores an unforgiving region of the Cusp and allies with new party members in Arc 3 of Advantage, a 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons audio drama focused on storytelling and character development, in the Darkmoor Podcast Network. Find us in your podcast app.